when all the news kept coming out. I was traveling, and every day I'd look at the New York Times, and I would be seeing all the news about different, the Time's Up related issues, and I really started to, I would say I had my second consciousness raising as a woman. I had my first when I went to Smith College, and sort of realized some of the assumptions I had made as sort of a happy-go-lucky, suburban high school student. Maybe the world was a little more complicated for women. And then this I felt like was my second consciousness raising in learning that, again, I do feel kind of naive working in the school world. You generally work with really nice people, but saying that, it's hard out there for women in a lot of fields. And it's not sort of this Garden of Eden of equality that I sometimes, when you work in schools, you sometimes work in these little utopias. That's what we at least hope we're trying to create here. So when I thought about that, and then I thought about how that related to my leadership and how people interact with me as a female leader, and then I happened to read Rachel Simmons' book, Enough as She Is, and it totally connected with me. And I read it because I was thinking, this will also be helpful for working with our girls. But I ended up underlining so many things that I thought were relevant to me. So then I reached out to Rachel, and she is the New York Times bestselling author of Odd Girl Out and The Curse of the Good Girl, was your first book. She's the co-founder of Girls Leadership, which has a very well-known summer program for girls, and also does professional development. So Meg and I were lucky enough to study with Rachel this summer as well. So I reached out to Rachel last winter and said, I was thinking about this two-tiered thing, bring you to campus and then have you talk to women leaders in education, and then work with the girls and then meet with parents. And so we arranged that, and we're very happy to have her here. So it's been a really exciting day because we had 92 educators on campus this morning, women from 60 different schools who came to us. We partnered with the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools and had a morning to talk about women in leadership. So Rachel did the keynote, and then I was on a panel with a couple of retired head and another sitting head, and it was a very energizing way to start the new year, and a really impressive group of women. So then we left the LBD, and all the girls came in, and Rachel got to work with them. And now, I'm so glad to have this turnout because we've offered some of these types of events before, and this is the best turnout we've had. And again, I've been recommending Enough as She Is to so many parents, parents who've come in for information sessions, other parents I talked to at Parents Weekend. So if you haven't read it, I urge you to read it. It's, I think, really transformative for seeing teenage girls and the context they are in 2019, and also just to reflect ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. It's my great pleasure.
I have the bad habit of not wearing a watch, so like teenagers, I'm going to use my phone to remind myself. But hi, it's been a really awesome day here at Westover, very fun, and during this time I want to talk with you a little bit about the challenges that girls are facing right now around achievement pressure, and hopefully give you some strategies to support them. I'm a mom of a girl, though she's only in elementary school, which as an expert in working with teenagers, I know how easy I have it with a 6-year-old. No matter what she does to me, I'm like, you're still not a teenager yet. I'm trying to find my place in the room, but I'll figure it out. Okay, so let's go this way. So here's what I would like to try to cover really quickly. I mean, when I say really quickly, I mean I want to make sure I leave time for questions. So I want to tell you how I think the culture has changed for girls since we were their age. I'd like to give you some strategies to talk back to some of the toxic messages that they are hearing about success and achievement, and try to give you some skills to help her redefine success in healthier ways. I call myself a recovering overachiever. I won a Rhodes Scholarship in 1998 and went to Oxford University and promptly freaked out and ended up dropping out of the Rhodes Scholarship, which I can say freely because my life turned out okay and I'm fine with it, though at the time my parents were not fine with it. But I freaked out and dropped out because I burned out, and I had become so obsessed with achievement and with winning and with being perfect that I lost sight of what I really cared about studying, which it turned out was not political theory at all. And, or was it, it wasn't law school either, I also withdrew from that, so after my parents basically became apoplectic. But in the students that I work with now, and I'm based at Smith College up in Western Mass, I see a lot of reminders of who I was back then. And we know, and you probably know, that this generation of adolescents is the most anxious, the most stressed out, the loneliest, the most depressed. I mean, these are all terrible distinctions. And so I would not have told you that as a leadership development expert for girls and women that my work would have turned to this wellness focus and how wellness and leadership come together, but this is what it is, and this is what this generation is really kind of desperate for. So, with that in mind, let me dive in and introduce you to what I call the college application industrial complex, which is kind of what you might guess it is. It's the vice grip that college admissions pressure has on our girls and boys. It's the expectation that they craft themselves into perfect specimens for college admission, and that their worthiness rides on the day that they hear from that college of their choice. And I think that the messages that they are getting there's a couple ones that we want to pay attention to. So one is this expectation that you are amazing at everything you do. I can't tell you how problematic this is. And it's funny when Julie says, that she sees herself in some of the book, or in a lot of the book. I went on an 11-city tour in 2018, the book came out last year. And wherever I went, that was the thing. I had women in their 80s coming up to my book signing table saying, I think you're talking about me. I had women in their 20s. And I didn't realize, so much of my work starts with me going, I wonder if I'm the only one who's going through this, and so a lot of my work with girls, I will say, is often an attempt to, exorcise ghosts from my own girlhood. But as it turns out, if you don't work certain things out, or if you live in a culture that expects you to kind of continue acting like a girl, then this stuff, you import a lot of this with you. So when I say everything I'm talking about, I think in many ways can apply to the parents of girls. And particularly, I'm psyched to see some dads here, yay dudes, but particularly to moms, and that moms set a really intense example. Under the Be Amazing at Everything You Do department, this is gonna seem like a random comparison, but I have a tendency when I'm home with my daughter to want to run around the house while she's there and pick up what's on the floor and clean what's in the sink and make sure that I'm talking about, I'm getting a couple nods, right? Mm-hmm. And everything has to be right, and the dog hair and the vacuum, when all she wants is for me to play Chutes and Ladders. Now, putting aside how much I can't stand Chutes and Ladders, it's a dark game for me. I want to say that the example that I am setting for her, what am I modeling for her in my inability to just be with her? What is she learning from me as the role model who cannot just simply enjoy the present moment in connection with her, but instead prioritizes making the house perfect for her, right? And so these are some of the ways in which the Be Amazing at Everything You Do, we transmit that apart from the college application pressure. We, particularly again as women, often can model some of that behavior to our daughters, projecting this idea that selflessness and worrying about how something looks matters more than connection, presence, the things that, of course, we want our daughters to be able to engage in. So a bit of a digression, but not exactly. And I guess to round out that point, if you think about what it means to be the perfect mom, how your particular community has defined the perfect mom. I live in Northampton, which is super kale and crunchy, but there's still a perfect mom thing happening there. You think about the tension between what does it mean to be the perfect mom in your community and who do you want your daughter to become? And you will often find upon reflection that those things are in conflict. That you actually don't want your daughter to be running around fluffing the pillows, making everything perfect, and yet somehow we've internalized that that's something that's important. So how does this relate to what they're experiencing? Well, they're getting the message around college pressure to be amazing at everything they do. There are two, I think, consequences of that toxic message that I want you to be clear about so that you can talk to her about it. One is that when you are expected to be amazing at everything you do, it's pretty hard not to feel awful about yourself a lot. because it means that you're always holding yourself to a standard that is beyond your reach. You're always expecting yourself to be more than you really are right now, which means you can't really appreciate the moment, you can't appreciate your own accomplishments now because there's always more to do. And so that, in other words, leaves us with a pervasive feeling of, I need more, this isn't enough, I am not enough, I always have to become more. So that's the kind of dark side of this expectation of excellence. The second thing, so in other words, there's pervasive self-criticism that comes along with that constant drive to be amazing. And for so many of them, of all of us, I think that self-criticism, we're almost, it's almost unconscious. It gets so embedded into who we are, this constantly pushing ourselves in a self-critical way. The second thing that happens, I think, under this expectation is that our daughters stop taking risks. They stop exposing themselves to experiences where they don't know the outcome, where there is some type of uncertainty, and where, more importantly, they might fail. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have had the most exhilarating learning experiences when I overcame something that I didn't think I could overcome, not when I knew what the outcome was going to be ahead of time. If you think about what young adults are supposed to be doing, they're supposed to be figuring out who they are, trying and failing, exploring, taking chances, but they're in a system that's telling them to do the opposite. One thing I want you to remind your kid, or maybe jumping the gun on a slide, is like, this is not her fault. So in other words, like, a lot of the girls think, what's wrong with me that I can't keep up? What's wrong with me that I'm falling apart and I don't want to get out of bed some days? Like, why can't I hack this? I mean, you want to say to them, if you're down with saying this isn't about you. This is about a really toxic and cruel system that is antithetical to learning, that is antithetical to you becoming, exploring yourself, and it's not about you. And I told the girls this today. But it's really important because so many of them think, again, it's me. What's wrong with me? Now, the other thing I want to tell you after I go back to the risk-taking, I'll go back to risk-taking in a second, that's related to this, which is that so many of them are convinced that all of their friends are doing better than they are, right? And so it's really, it's like they're convinced that all of their friends are smarter or are getting better grades or just sort of have better lives, whatever it is. You want to talk to them about that, and now they're going to roll their eyes and tell you you're clueless and whatever they'll tell you. I guess I should have kind of started there. They'll always do that, but it doesn't mean they're not listening. Well, just because, it's a bit of I maybe should have led with that a little bit more. Teenagers are incredibly challenging sometimes, but I do think that they are listening, even if the way that they connect with us is wholly unappetizing and annoying, they're still there. So I have a 6.5-year-old who thinks I'm basically a god most of the time, and I really relish that, again, because I spend so much time with teenagers. I'm like, tell me more about how much you love me, because I know what's coming. But remember, just because the way that adolescents connect is annoying doesn't mean that they're not connecting. So if they're standing in front of you, even if they're rolling their eyes at you and telling you you're clueless or stupid or however your kid sometimes talks to you, which they all do at different points, again, they are absolutely listening, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But when you say to them, don't worry, you think your friends are doing better, everyone is struggling, that's a moment where they're going to be like, oh, they will act like you're an idiot. But they do need you to hear that. They do need you to say that, and they need to hear that from you as many times as you're willing to say it. And so this terrible sense that everyone's doing better than I am just compounds their sense of what's wrong with me. And that's why it's so important to try to give them the cultural context so that they're not blaming themselves. But just to go back to this, there's something in social psychology, there's this concept around goals. I don't know why I'm picking this up because I'm in the middle of the lecture. I get a little too comfortable speaking. Sorry, I'm slurping my coffee. So, okay. So there's two types of goals. There's performance goals and learning goals. And I think this concept is really useful in thinking about your kid's learning path. So performance goals are when you undertake a goal because you're trying to avoid failure or because you're seeking a reward. In other words, you seek out to accomplish a task because it can be express reasons of I don't want to get an F or I want to get an A, that kind of a thing. So I want to get an A in French is a performance goal. I want to master the past tense in French is a different kind of goal. It's a learning goal. That's the second kind. A learning goal is when you engage with a goal because you intrinsically want to know the answer to a question. You would like to master something. You want to because you have a question that you would like to see answered, and it comes from inside of you, and it comes from an intrinsic desire to learn. Again, does not have to do with avoiding failure or seeking reward. So how does this manifest in your daughter's life? Well, it manifests when you ask the question, hey, are you taking that class because you're super into it or because you think you're supposed to in order to get into college? Now, look, every kid who's in an environment like this will have to have some number of performance goals, and I'm not saying performance goals are bad. Nothing wrong with seeking reward or trying to play the game to get into a good college. Nothing wrong with that. But if your goals are predominantly performance goals, if you lack a significant cluster of learning goals, and learning goals don't all have to be in the classroom. Your learning goal could be related to your sport, it could be related to your service that you're engaged in, it could be a hobby, but you want to make sure that your daughter is pursuing goals that come from a place inside of her where if she's not feeling lit up, then at least has a craving to understand something. And that is where we see a real problem with resilience, because girls who are predominantly pursuing performance goals tend to be not only less happy, right, because they're basically just like trying to do things based on what other people want rather than what they want, but they're also less resilient, by which I mean you can knock them over more easily. And if you think about this in your own life, like, you're much more capable of fighting for something when you believe in it, when you stand for it in a deep way, in a foundational way. If you don't really believe in something, if you're doing it because you're supposed to in kind of a pro forma way, it's a lot easier to knock you over. Does that make sense to you guys? So you will see much more resilience in your daughter when she is connected to activities and experiences that tap into that innate, that drive to learn. Okay, cool. So that's that. The other thing is NBD, that's that. NBD means no big deal. Sorry, I talk like a 14-year-old. So, yeah, okay, good. We covered that. Let me see one other thing. I told you that. Good, I told you that. Okay, so those two things. Here's another thing. Make sure, so my parents were always, I mean, it's not like I'm so young, but I have a memory of my parents always saying, oh, Rachel, you just put too much pressure on yourself. Like, and I think by this they also meant like, oh, we just want you to be happy. Turns out until you drop out of the Rhodes Scholarship and withdraw from Yale Law School, then they don't want you to be happy anymore. But whatever, that's just my issues with my parents. I love them so much. So. Okay. But like, there was a lot of like, you're putting too much pressure on yourself and we just want you to be happy, and like, why are you getting so upset about stuff? So I have a real issue with this, because I think that we have to stop telling our daughters they put too much pressure on themselves. It's a way of saying like, oh, if you could just chill out, you'd be fine. In other words, we're not really acknowledging the culture that they are learning in, which is telling them all these terrible things. So when we say, oh, you're just putting too much pressure on yourselves, the other thing we're doing is pretending as if we as their parents have no, like, part in this. And yes, we do. I don't care if you make your house like Canyon Ranch. Like, we all have a part in it, okay? And not funny Canyon Ranch joke? Thank you. You can laugh a little harder. I felt like in Connecticut I was going to get like more of a laugh on the Canyon Ranch joke. Thank you very much. Okay. But the point is that we do have to take some responsibility for the culture. If we want our daughters to understand that it's not their fault, I mean, we don't want them to think, oh, this is just because you put too much pressure on yourself. So these are just things to keep in mind as you talk to them. Okay, a couple of other things. I spent a lot of time with the girls talking about risk-taking and the importance of like putting yourself out there and trying new things. Things that you can say to your daughter when she is facing a difficult situation and feels stressed and doesn't know the outcome is a really good one is, what's the worst that could happen here? Like, what do you think the worst thing that could happen here is? I offer a caveat, which is that girls are exceptionally talented at telling you the worst thing that could happen. They just go from 0 to worst thing that could happen, like in 1 second. Please come in. You can totally, if you want. There's like seats right next to me, which is really awkward and annoying, but there's actually 2 right here. Just letting you know.
There's one here too.
There's fully a seat right here.
You can come sit here too.
You can. There's a space over there. So girls are really good. Oh, there's even one in the back over there, next to Meg. At telling you the worst thing that could happen. So I say this with a caveat, like, the worst thing that could really happen. Not my life will be over and I'll never be employable, because that's probably not true for your daughters. But like genuinely, what's the worst thing that can happen, and can you live with that? And when you have that conversation with them, it kind of walks them back from that catastrophizing, which is not useful, even though it's sometimes funny, and the girls like to bond over how their lives are over and how they'll never whatever they say they're going to do, but it's actually not really useful. So what's the worst that can happen? Can you deal with that? I often add to my students, do you have the resources to deal with that? Like, what would you do if the worst thing happened? Let's talk about what you would do to help yourself, or how we would help you. And then another thing is asking them what the minimum benefit is, which you might want to come up with like a better word than minimum benefit. But what I mean by that is like when something doesn't go well for them, after you have empathized, and you know, I really want to emphasize empathy. I say that 10 times fast. Your daughter, so one of the, I think, transitions of parenting an adolescent, going from parenting a child to parenting an adolescent, is recognizing that you're not going to be able to solve their problems the way I get to solve my kid's problems because she's 6. Like, I'm very aware that my capacity to control my daughter's environment and her life is waning quickly by the month. And one of the challenges of parenting an adolescent is that a lot of parents are very unwilling, understandably, I say this with no judgment, to give up that recognition that you actually can't control their environments anymore. You can't fix for them. And they know that before you know that. And that's one of the sources of challenge, because you're just like gung-ho to try to fix and help, and they're just like, dude, it's over, like you can't do that anymore. So maybe they talk just like that. So what do you do? How do you compensate for the void that is created when your agency is taken away? It may not feel logical to you, but I'm just telling you based on my own research that your empathy with your daughter actually goes a long way and can fill the void that is created by you're now no longer feeling like you can fix their problems. And empathy, what that really looks like is you simply saying to them, I'm so sorry that you are feeling this way, and I really understand. And if I were you, I would feel that way too. Or like, I can completely understand why you would be feeling so hurt, or why you would be feeling so scared, and you just be quiet. If you've ever been coached on how to ask for a raise, which I have, you know, what they tell you is like, ask for it and then just be quiet, right? Don't be like, but it's okay if you can't, right? You're just supposed to say, I'd really like $10,000 more. And it's so hard, right? Like you just want to just explode with like, no, don't worry, you don't have to give it to me. I would recommend the same kind of like abrupt silence with your empathy. So in other words, like just say like, I'm sorry, like you're hurt. I'm sorry you're hurting. I just want you to know I really feel for you. I really get it. I understand that that can make you feel useless, but actually it's what she craves. She wants to know that you see her feelings, that you take them seriously. We actually all want to know that. That can take the place of some of the fix-it kind of capacity that you used to have. I went away from where I wanted to talk about. Yeah, the minimum benefit. So after you're done like radically empathizing with your child, and her hair will be blown back with shock at your empathy, you can eventually work your way to what's like the least good thing that could come out of this. Or, like in other words, okay, so you didn't get into the college of your choice, or you didn't get the role that you wanted in that play, or I don't know, you didn't get the grade that you wanted. Was there anything good that came out of this process? You also can talk with your kid about the ways in which you have encountered unexpected benefits that came out of challenges. Let me put this in more like real terms. If you've ever had your heart broken by somebody, like in your life, my guess is you grew from that in some way. And you learned something about yourself, you gained access to new experiences or relationships that you never would have had your heart not been broken. That's the minimum benefit. Would you want to go back and re-break your heart again just to learn that? Probably not. But something good came out of the process. If we want to raise like kids that aren't perfectionistic, we have to cultivate, both by modeling through our own example, but also by talking with them, an appreciation for process. That it's not, you have to unhook from the outcome. It can't always be all or nothing, black or white, did I win, did I lose? There are always good things that happen that come along the way. Now how do you model that? If something doesn't go your way, you might try to work in, well, you know, at least I got this out of it. It doesn't mean that you're diminishing your own pain, but you're just saying like something else came along. And they are listening. And that is a really kind of critical kind of modeling to do. Okay. Sorry, keeping track of time here. Cool. So, let's talk about imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. Your daughter, that's Maya Angelou, and she has famously, other celebrities and VIPs have gone on the record about imposter syndrome, but I love the way she does. So one thing that I have learned in my research is that imposter phenomenon or syndrome, whatever you want to call it, is firmly in place by adolescents. And what that basically means is it's when you feel like an imposter, when you have imposter phenomenon, it means that you feel like a fraud. You feel like you kind of like don't belong where you are, and then it's only a matter of time before everybody figures that out and you get like escorted out of the building by security or like taken out of that honors class or kicked out of the college or you're fired, whatever it is. Most people experience imposter phenomenon at certain points in their life. Other people we wish would experience more imposter phenomenon and don't. I feel like that's on my mind lately a lot. And so what does this matter for you? If you begin to hear your daughter saying things like, I don't feel like I belong, or I'm not smart enough, or I can't hack it, and you know that that's not true. I mean, look, there are certainly times where your daughter may be identifying like a genuine gulf between her ability and what is called for. But if you know that she's kind of beset by this like anxiety about not belonging, if you suspect that it's more of like an imposter thing, then here's what you can say to her. And I said this to them today too. Everybody feels that way sometimes. We all have a voice inside of us that questions our right to be where we are. We all have a voice inside of us that says, you're not as smart as other people think you are, you're not what, you're a fraud. But that doesn't mean we have to listen to the voice. And doesn't mean you can't necessarily make it go away, but you can understand that it is part of you, that we all have that scared small part of us, but you don't have to identify with it. So we're not trying to say, I just want to be clear that we're not saying like, oh, don't think that, that's just totally wrong. And no, you can say like, yeah, that's something that comes up. And it's part of everyone. And I feel that way too and you can finish that sentence. And put her at ease. But I don't think we try to make her think that she can make it go away. Like we all have to sort of cope with it. I did an exercise with the students today that was much more of a deeper exercise about how to wrestle with the parts of them that feel like they don't belong. And some of them spoke up in front of each other and shared the results, which were one of them. They were asked to complete the sentence. Sometimes I worry I'm not as blank as other people think I am. And one of them talked about feeling like the need to be perfect and how she and wrestled with that and shared with all of her peers sort of the ways in which she knows she can't be. But it was really powerful. I don't know, were you there for that? That's pretty awesome. You weren't there for that. She wasn't there for that. She was like working.
Ben was there.
Yeah, Ben was there for that. It was, where did Ben
I was
go?
there.
You guys were there. It was cool, right? Guys, it was powerful, right? Okay, guys. Cool. All right. Hold on, I want to make sure that I get through everything. All right. So I wanna hold on. Oopsie, trash and car service. Thank you, computer. Okay. I want to talk quickly about gratitude and also overthinking. So gratitude is a really critical antidote to a lot of the not enoughness, because I think what gratitude does is it provides an anchor in the here and now and allows us to appreciate what we do have in favor of what we still feel we need more of in order to feel worthy. And so to the extent that you can cultivate a practice of gratitude, that sounds so hippy-dippy, but what I really just mean is like finding some time, even via text, say, here are 3 things I'm grateful for today, what are you grateful for? It matters. I think one of the reasons I'm hired by some companies to do this kind of work is because, like them, I also am looking for quick things to do. Like I don't have time to go to an ashram in India and like find everything. So like I'm trying to give you things that you can do quickly. And gratitude is one of those things, to be able to just, as much as you can remember to do it, just to say like, here's what I'm grateful for now, because what that means is here is what is enough now. Here's what is enough now. And what I'm trying to achieve with the work that I do with students and what I hope you can do with your daughters is to help them understand that no amount of success is worth their wellness or their self-worth. Like, it's just not worth it. It really isn't. And we can talk more about our role in that as parents in terms of suggesting the opposite. But really, that's what I'm getting at, is that you should not have to trade, no high-achieving girl should have to trade her wellness or her self-worth in exchange for success. One thing that I haven't mentioned that I want to explain, if part of you, I know I don't dwell a lot on the problem because I want to give you strategies, but if part of you is wondering, like, what is going on and why are girls particularly challenged, one reason is that because it's really easy to look at girls and be like, what's the deal, man? They have like every opportunity that could ever be afforded to a human being, especially probably your daughters. The problem with that is that with so much opportunity, I'm not going to say it comes great responsibility, but with so much opportunity comes also enormous pressure to fulfill the expectations. Now, it would be one thing if we said to girls, hey, like, you can do anything you want and don't worry about the bikini body and don't worry about like getting 1 like per minute on Instagram and don't worry about being liked by everyone and having like your popping social life. We didn't do that. We said you're going to do all these new things that girls have never been given permission to do before, and we still expect you to fulfill the very old school expectations that girls and women have always dealt with. That's a crushing load. Psychologists call this role overload. It's just too many roles for one person to play, and it creates enormous stress. Role overload is related to another concept, which is role conflict, and that is that when all these roles that you're expected to play are actually in conflict with each other. So if you think about like the daily schedule of your daughter's life, you know, the thing, like if she wants to have a certain kind of physical appearance and she wants to have a certain social life, the hours that she has to invest into those goals conflict with the hours that the activities she needs to do in order to get into the college she wants to get into. And I think this is why adolescent girls get the least sleep of any group of Americans, because I do think they're coping with this pressure. And so that's part of what's going on. That's not all of it. But you'll notice I'm not sitting here saying it's all about screen time. I'm not going to do that, because I do think, I really want to suggest that we don't kind of categorically impugn technology and social media, because I do think that lets us off the hook too as parents, like, and as adults. Like there are plenty of things. If we criticize social media and technology, then we don't really have to talk about anything else. And I think it's just more complex than that. Okay. So this is my favorite cartoon to talk about overthinking. Now you can I'll let you look at that. So ruminating is the psychological term for it, which is, ruminating is basically like repeated focus on negative thoughts, typically kind of like in a circular way. It's usually dwelling on the causes or the consequences of a particular problem that you're having without actually taking action on it. Overthinking is predominantly, I shouldn't say predominantly, but is most intensely experienced by young women and middle-aged women. But all people experience it, but it's essentially middle-aged women and adolescent girls are the people who suffer from it the most, present company included. Okay. No, I'm not kidding. So I will tell you that most adolescent girls can tell you exactly what overthinking is, but no one has ever told them about it as a concept. And what we want them to understand, well, I'm going to tell you a couple things about this. Let me start with co-ruminating. So co-ruminating is when two people are ruminating aloud about something. And co-ruminating happens quite a bit between adolescents and their parents. The parents tend to be the most popular co-ruminators with adolescents. And how do you know if you're co-ruminating with your daughter? Well, this is if you're having kind of the same conversation over and over again and kind of dwelling repetitively on either a relationship problem that she's having, usually it's a relationship problem or some other challenge, and you feel that you're sort of having the same conversation and not actually taking any action. And so co-ruminating is not productive, even though it might feel, you might be like, oh, I'm really glad she's talking to me. Ruminating, what it does is, here's what ruminating actually does. It elevates anxiety. It is considered to be the primary cause of the gender difference in depression reports. So in other words, adolescent girls and adult women report experiencing depression at twice the rate of adolescent boys and men. Ruminating is considered to be the primary reason why. So this is a really big issue. Ruminating is also linked to a decline in motivation and a decline in problem-solving skills. So you're like, oh, I'm really helping her because we're having this conversation, we're gonna get towards a solution. You're not helping her. You're not helping her by having that repetitive conversation. Bad things. I'm not sure what just happened there.
I like the circle.
Okay, well that's okay, because I'll just use my charisma. And there was a time when we just spoke that kind of anyway, so some things that I would like for you to be aware of is, and my book has more information about like how to push her out of that circle and more into like, what are you going to do about it, or let's take a step forward. But it's important to remind her that thinking a lot about something doesn't necessarily get you closer to solving that problem. And that distraction is actually is probably considered to be the biggest antidote to ruminating. And when I say antidote, I mean it's a tool to manage it. We're not really going to stop it, but we can learn to manage it. Distraction is usually like exercise, taking a walk, doing a hobby. If you catch her in the act of doing that, if you find that she's brooding about something, again, you want to remind her, and you can also direct her to, there are books, there's a great book called Women Who Think Too Much, which is filled with great information about this, but you really want to steer her away from it because it's not productive. So distraction, naming it, just naming it and saying, because again, a lot of them, it's not been named for them. They don't have a language for it, and they haven't been given a reason not to do it. Can't you just hear her now? Now you're telling me what I can't think? That's supposed to be funny. Okay, I thought. Okay, here are some other things I want to and then I want to make sure I open the floor for a little while, so we can talk. But just a couple things to keep in mind. Oh, I guess I forgot that was off. So I have this theory, which I'm, into because it's my theory. But remember when they were learning to walk, and they would fall down when they were learning to walk? Do you remember the first thing they did after they fell? Yes, they looked at you. Why were they looking at you? What did they?
See your reaction.
Because why? What happened if you looked panicked? They went to Banana Land, right? But what happened if you were chill and you were like, hey, you're good? They kept going. So my theory, and I, not long ago was in this space of noticing this, and because I work with teenagers, like a bell went off or a light or whatever goes off when you have a moment. I was like, oh, this is actually what teenagers do too. Kids are actually always doing this. It's just most visible and most explicit when our children are learning to walk. They're looking at us and asking a question. Am I okay? Is this okay? If we freak out, they freak out. If we can keep our stuff together, they can keep their stuff together more. Which is to say that, again, no matter how annoying or, aloof or over your teenager seems, they're still looking at you and they still want to know the answer to that question. Again, they may act like you are the most irritating human being on the planet. They're still watching you for your reaction. So your responsibility, to put it bluntly, is to keep your shit together. Whatever comes home. If it's a test, if it's panic, because they go off to the races. If you've ever seen a stress tantrum on a Sunday night at 11 o'clock and I can't do it, if you show the reaction, so you have to figure out how to calm yourself, how to regulate yourself. A couple of other things. Share your mistakes with your daughter. You are not a good role model by doing everything right in front of her. You are a great role model if you can say, I screwed up today and it was hard, and you show them by example that mistakes don't kill you and that mistakes are a normal part of life. If you don't talk about your mistakes with your child, they can believe that there's something wrong with them for making a mistake. It can widen the gulf between you and them because they don't therefore have like a practice of talking with you about it. So if you've never done this before, start and watch. I mean, you will find they can't believe it when you do that. They're like, whoa, really? Are you really going to tell me that? Like the kid who doesn't pay attention to you and rolls their eyes at you is suddenly leaning forward like, oh, tell me about how you screwed up. So it's a great tool to just help them understand that mistakes are normal. But when you show them that you have navigated a mistake well, you're teaching them how to do the same. And so to that end, I want to remind you that when you make a mistake in their presence, even in as simple a way as losing your keys, you do not want to say, I'm such an idiot. You do not want to say, like, I'm such a klutz, I'm so stupid. This is another sort of toddler analogy, but remember when they were little and they would just like imitate everything that you said to the point where you would be like, can you just not drop that F-bomb in public or whatever? Just kidding, I'm sure nobody here did that. I actually did that. I just love making that joke, but like, I didn't do that. I really didn't, I would tell you. I'm sure you can probably figure that out by now. I would not hold anything back with you. But the point is that there's a lot of mimicry, right? And so, again, just because they get older and just because they don't seem quite as trained on you, doesn't mean they're not watching you. Their mimicry becomes more sophisticated. Instead of mimicking the words that you say, they're mimicking how you respond to situations. They're mimicking how, they're learning from you how to respond to stress. And if your response to stress is to become explosive or to become self-hating, you're teaching them something. So I'm asking you to be much more vigilant and mindful about the way you react to things. Like I had a dad, I know this is being recorded, I have a dad, but my dad, who definitely suffers from anxiety, but not the kind of like I'm scared anxiety, but the kind that manifests this way. So whenever he would be under stress with me, I have vivid memories of him driving me to birthday parties before GPSs, right? And so he would get lost. We lived in Montgomery County, Maryland. You know, it's a big area. We would get lost and he would just lose his temper. He would get so upset in the face of a challenge. Now today, in my 40s, I can see that he was probably panicked. I can see that he maybe felt embarrassed. But at the time, his explosive reaction to being stressed was something that I then learned to do. And then I would get explosive when I was in my 20s and I couldn't do something and I realized through therapy, thank you therapy, that that's where I had learned it. And yes, I'm talking about therapy in Connecticut, and I will continue. Okay. But seriously, it's like I had to learn to undo some of that. And you right now have an opportunity to think about, how do I react to stress in front of my child? How do I talk to myself in front of my child when I am posed with a challenge? And how can I talk to myself in a way that sets the example for her? And this isn't easy stuff, especially because when you're under stress, you're under stress. The last thing I want to say before I open the floor to questions is a question that I have been really intrigued by in my own parenting is, well, I should say, before I say the question, I should say, one of the things that happens to me as a parent when I feel stressed out about something that my daughter is doing or failing to do is that I stop focusing on whatever it is she has failed to do and I then globalize it. So like, let's say she somehow fails to like listen to my directions about something, which is like every 5 minutes. There are times where I may globalize that to, what if she has some executive functioning problems? And what if she's like not gonna be able to function well in the world? And what if she can't like take notes in school? And what's wrong with her? Right? And I can't, and I go from this one thing that's happened to off to the races, right? Like pew, 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 like my brain's going crazy. That's the fireworks noise. That's my friends and I do that. Pew, pew. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So anyway, the point is, if you are guilty of this, you will find, if you relate to this, that you parent like crap when you're in that position, because basically you're looking through goggles that have globalized whatever the problem is, and your kid's just like, dude, I just didn't hear your instructions, like, has nothing to do with my employability, like 20 years. So you don't parent from a place that makes you proud when you're operating from fear. So the question then that I want you to consider, when your kid does something that makes you feel anxious and upset, when your kid does something that inspires that panic, and you feel yourself, pew, 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 globalizing, I want you to ask yourself, how would I parent in this moment if I were not afraid? Meaning, if I knew that she was going to be fine, really, if I knew that this was going to blow over and that this is no big deal, what would I say in this moment? And then I want you to try. I want you to try it one time for me and see the difference. What would you say? Even if you don't believe it, fake it till you make it, okay? And then say it and see the difference in how you parent. You will parent in a way that you feel much prouder of. The reality is, it probably is going to be okay, especially for your kids. We don't have time to get into this whole thing about like, what does it mean to want our children to be happy, and like, why are we trying so hard to like give them all the opportunities? That's a bigger, more philosophical question. But in the meantime, most of the time they're going to be fine, even if they're not going to achieve the level of excellence that you may have fantasized about them, for them. So again, how would I parent if I were not afraid in this moment, if I knew everything was going to work out, and then try to say that. So with that, I would like to open the floor to questions. What would you like to talk about? We have about 10 minutes. So what are you thinking about as I'm as I'm chatting here? Yes.
Well, I'm gonna laugh because
Go ahead.
I need counseling now.
As I said,
Because we were
therapy's
raised
gonna win.
Italian, and I'm laughing because the first thing you said was about keeping the room, housekeeping, cleaning has to get done.
Mhm.
Certain things, but I get it, because I do, and thank God my husband is the complete opposite of me, and he's Italian as well, but he
Right.
was he's raised different. My mother-in-law just did everything for him, so it was wonderful.
Yes, Jewish people have the same problem.
Yeah, well, yes.
The mother does everything for the son.
No, but there's certain, like my daughter's a senior here and she is having difficulty, like, some of the college things came back and she thought she wanted to do nursing and she didn't get into a nursing school, so her biggest thing was, oh my God, maybe I don't wanna do nursing because they didn't think I was smart enough to get in. So, there's, and
Did you
then.
tell her that was definitely why she didn't get in?
No.
Sorry,
No,
I
I
was
told her
punchy, it's been a long
she
day.
applied to 14 other colleges, so I'm sure she'll get in.
Yes.
Actually, it was ironic, she got into a nursing track at a different college,
Okay.
which actually then it made me think a little bit more, because the college that she did not get into for nursing starts off at freshman year.
Mhm.
So you could move out, but you can't move back in.
Mhm.
But this other school,
You can go in anytime.
well, at your junior year, so it gives you really 2 years to kind of have a feel. Do you want
Is
to
that
do
the
nursing?
minimum benefit? I feel like we just discovered a minimum benefit.
Well, yeah, no, and, well,
Right.
I'm
You're like on board, sorry, I'm
on board.
interrupting.
No, I'm just saying I'm on board, and my thing to that was that, I'm 52 years old almost. When I went to college, I went to Quinnipiac. My mother knew enough to send us all to college, though she herself never went to college. But, it was kind of like, do you wanna go to college? Where do you think you wanna go? So you kind of just stuck local and you went, and thank God they had the money to send us. But it was not this. I mean, we did traveling, we did 14 applications. I'm just saying, so the pressure, I think, too, is,
Mhm.
like you're saying, that they have so many opportunities.
Yes.
I don't know, part of me is like, maybe we should have just said, no, look, pick 5 and call it a day, and if you don't, then you're gonna go to community college, I don't know.
So this is great, I'm really glad you brought that
No,
up.
I'm saying I think life is stressful for all, and then what do you say to her? I mean, my husband and I were like, don't worry, you'll get into.
That's kind of all you can say, is
Okay.
like, it's gonna work out. But I really am glad you brought this up, because I think one of the things that happens, particularly in affluent families, is that when you've given your child every opportunity, there's something called the paradox of choice. It's like a concept where if you have too many choices, then that actually is a problem. Like it makes you both feel that it's like you have to make the most perfect decision, and then if you make the wrong one, it's all your fault because you had all the power to begin with. It's a book by Barry Schwartz. It's a whole concept that I've grossly condensed, but who's a sociologist, but or maybe he's an economist. Anyway, the point is, it's not necessarily, this is the problem, this is the dark side of affluence and opportunity. Now, part of what happens to these girls, and I think this happened to me as well, is that you begin to think that you're invincible. You begin to think that if only I study hard enough, I can make the world bend to my will. And college decisions are the first time that many of them have to encounter the limitations of that. Trust me when I say, as someone who works on a college campus, you don't want your kid going off to school thinking that life is just a test that she can ace if she only works hard enough. And the reason why is because when something happens, and it will, that completely upends her sense of control over the world, like, it's really, really awful when she's far away from home and figures that out. You are much better served by having her be closer to you now and be kind of a little bit more under your thumb, frankly, before she's in college, to have those conversations and to say, things happen, like, you don't get to control the world. But understand that they have been given that illusion. They have been essentially told that if they just do the right thing, life should open up for them. And we all know, because we're grown-ups, that that's not true. But many of them don't have that knowledge. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go home and rain on their parade and say, I just saw a speaker tonight, and guess what? Like, life sucks! But, like, that's not what I'm saying. Just to understand that, like, there are things that, sorry, I know, Connecticut messing up, saying all the bad words, but, like, like, it's important for them to have a recognition. It's sort of like the understanding of mortality. Let me give you an analogy. Maybe it's a little morbid, but when someone close to you passes away, for me, when that has happened, it is as if suddenly this like seam opens up in the world and suddenly you realize how incredibly fragile and vulnerable everything is. And it's a terrible way to walk around in the world because you suddenly understand, because we blind ourselves to that knowledge most of the time. We can't think that way because otherwise it's too overwhelming. Another analogy would be like, you can't think that when you're flying, that you're in a tin can 30,000 feet. You just have to like put that knowledge out of you. In a way, we want girls to have a little bit of that knowledge, that like, that they are mortal, that not that they're mortal, but that that there is a fragility and a vulnerability to the world, but that's normal and that's not a personal failing of theirs, if that makes sense. And you know, they will be much more resilient for that, actually. So if that's helpful. Other questions? Yes.
This might take a second to unfold. So, a lot of my friends are unhappy with work, and yet I find that with my kid, and maybe a lot of your kids, we push them on the same path as we did, or that we went through, or that your friends have, and we just push them without knowing that a vast majority of us are unhappy. So how do we make it so their choices are built on, you know, not the ashram being happy all the time, but that life is more fulfilling? And so like your opening conversation was college, you know, it's that big push when, I can't speak for all of you here, there's so many people unhappy with a degree, with a job. So what are we really pushing them for?
Wow, I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I keep thinking about too. And I don't have an easy answer to that, but that's when I said like it's a longer conversation about why are we doing this to begin with? What is it that we think we're giving our children? Some parents will say to me, well, it's opportunity. You know, getting to a good college, they'll have opportunities, they'll have relationships with other people who are successful. And that's true to some extent, but does that really confer happiness? What are we assuming happiness is about? And are we assuming, because the research shows that after a certain income level, your happiness does not measurably increase. And that income level is not like $100 million. It's like an actually pretty low number. That money buys happiness to a point. So what is it that we think? Now some parents will say, well, they'll be able to follow their dreams. But if they have not been able to figure out their dreams because they're enthralled to the college application complex, industrial complex, then yes. So these are really important and profound conversations to be having. I do think that the short answer to your question is helping our girls develop purpose, a sense of purpose, and I write about this in the book. Purpose is essentially being engaged in a goal because you both enjoy it and because it makes an impact on the world beyond yourself. When anyone, your friends, our daughters, are focused on the self entirely, you're less likely to be happy. Self-oriented people are less likely to be happy than people who are, I don't mean public service necessarily, I just mean people who are engaged in changing the world in some way. That could be inventing new technologies. I'm not talking about like, you know, necessarily like starting a nonprofit. So I think the question then is, how do we orient our daughters to engage in things that light them up, that take them beyond themselves in some way? And that's the rub of the college application industrial complex. I mean, so much of what they're going through literally runs counter to all the research on happiness. Like if you read any book on happiness and then compare what you're reading to what your kids are being told, you're like, how are they even getting themselves out of bed? I've written a couple articles about this, like on my website or whatever, but because I did this research for the last book, and everything I read, it was just like, it was awful. So purpose, I think, is kind of the short answer, and there are definitely ways to try to listen to what's lighting them up and steer them towards that. Sorry, I'm not looking at the clock. Okay, 6:59, we can take more questions. I'll be very concise. Anyone else have a question or? Yes.
See if I can make it concise too. Really concise.
That's okay.
So an article I read recently had said, you know, how to get your teen to listen or whatever. One of those buzz articles, like 4 ways to get your teen to listen.
I'm guilty of writing those too. So.
Yeah, it's
okay. We all have to pay our bills. Go ahead.
But one of it was like, you know, don't say like when I was a kid, right? Like they'll close off or whatever. On the other side,
I think it was like Lisa Demore. Yeah,
yeah.
I was part of Lisa Demore's case. I think I just
So on the other side, so with my daughter, and I don't know if many can identify with this, like I've read part of your book and I identify a lot with my daughter. Like she's kind of an active perfectionist working on it, and I'm a still in recovery perfectionist, so I can identify a lot.
Sure.
And wanting to relate to her, sometimes I think I say, oh, that happened to me, this happened, like wanting to share and connect by sharing stories, but then also not wanting her to tune out and say, it's not about you, like it's not your story. So how to,
Yeah.
it feels like a nuance, and I'm wondering if you
Yeah,
have
it is a
input on that.
nuance. I think it's a timing thing. So I think like, it's sort of like when you have, it's sort of the difference between active listening and like people who aren't listening well. So active listening, so it's annoying, I think, generally when you're trying to tell somebody about a problem and they're like, oh my God, this happened to me too, right? Like that's annoying. We all do it at different points. But when I teach active listening to students because it's a long story. But active listening is about taking in what someone's saying and either paraphrasing what you've just heard, like it sounds like this, or empathizing, it sounds like you feel X, or I would feel that way too, or asking questions. So in other words, demonstrating genuine and real kind of interest in what you're hearing. After you've done that, you could say, I was thinking of telling you about something from when I was your age, would you want to hear it? And then just let her, like, decide. It's sort of like another piece of great advice is when your kid is upset to say, do you, and this is not mine, but like, do you want advice or do you want to just vent? Do you want to hear about how this applies to me or do you want me to just listen? So I will tell you that one of the kind of simple ways of getting a teenager to like not roll their eyes at you is to just give them autonomy in conversations, because so much of their lives are like programmed for them. So just putting it in their court and saying, here's one way that I was thinking about helping you, what do you think? Do you want that? Would that be useful? Instead of imposing what we think would be useful to them. I mean, they just love that. Kids of all ages frankly love that. I try really hard in my own life as a parent, even with a 6-year-old, to knock before I come in, or to say, do you mind if I brush your hair, rather than just going like this to her, which of course I want to do desperately. It's so ratty. But to like respect her autonomy, you know, like, because that goes a long way, and that brings them to you, as opposed to, because we all have a craving for autonomy, and that's so part of, at every age, and so part of that recoiling is just feeling like you're imposing it on me. It doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to hear. And I think that if we're thinking about the same article, it just came out like a couple weeks ago. It was Lisa. I think that's kind of what she means, though she doesn't put it in those terms. And Lisa D'Amour is an excellent, she's written Untangled. She's a new book coming out in February about anxiety girls. She's a phenomenal resource. Yeah. So I would say I'm gonna, oh, you can't see it, I forgot. So I was just gonna say, you can join my, I do a lot of posting on the Facebook about this kind, about parenting tips, and I have a pretty active community there. But I also have started a parenting course, an online parenting course for parents of girls called Enough As We Are. It's a live course. And because I've just recently gone into the online instruction world. So if you're interested, you can find my website at rachelsimmons.com. The next course, it's an 8-week course, will start in April. And yeah, I'm really into it now, so you can just like hang out with me every week for 8 weeks. It's pretty fun. But I want to thank Julie, and I want to thank Westover, and I want to thank Lauren. Where did you go, Lauren, for all the work that you did today supporting my visit. It's been an awesome, awesome visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we can send out that website link too. Thank you.